Well, thank you for the invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to talk to you about our city, about our processes. And let me start with this slide. The question is, how do we achieve high quality of architecture? This is our field of investigation. It's the city of Basel. Basel is a city-state. It's a rather small city. It has around 200,000 inhabitants and about the same number of employees, but at the same time, it's the center of an agglomeration of around 840,000 inhabitants in 3 nations. So we're right at the border of France and Germany. So within this trinational city, what we experience is a high dynamic. We've heard this morning already. There's a strong densification going on, which it's not like in Innsbruck where you have the mountains that are delimiting the space. In Basel, it's the borders. Basel has a long tradition of being a city of culture, and by culture, it's also a city of architecture. I would like to talk or divide my presentation into 2 main topics. We have the formal instruments or our formal tools that we are dealing with that are like our guidelines in our everyday work. And then in the second part, I would talk about the informal way of how we are doing things, more like the practice. So if we're talking about the building and planning regulations, of course, we have a formal building and construction law that we have to observe. We have an advisory board or Stadtbildkommission, a committee that's being appointed by the state government. Then we have quite strong restrictions when it comes to historic preservation. And we have a particularity, which is the Mehrwertabgabe. It's a law to compensate added property value due to rezoning. That has something to do with this densification, but it has also something to do with public spaces, as I will show you. And in the end, of course, participation, as we've heard today, is, of course, a big issue. So what's probably important to understand is when we talk about building and planning laws or the regulations, is that in Switzerland, every country, every state, or even every city can pass their own laws. So every community, every municipality has their own laws because it's a decentralized public administration. The self-government is very important, and also to say there are, of course, strong property rights. So one of the tools that are important in this context is, of course, for instance, the Richtplan. That's like a general spatial plan approved by the state. It's the guidelines for the urban development. It's quite broad. Its aim is to guide the urban development, obviously, social, economic, infrastructural, environmental efforts, how to make an urban area a better place, healthier place, or a juster place to live. It's not about architecture. Then the second one is the Zonenplan, zoning laws. You all are familiar with that. It's a special law passed by the state legislature, by the parliament, and approved by the people. The third one is quite important for us because it's a Bebauungsplan. That's like the city has the right to change the zoning laws or the building planning law by adopting its own laws for a certain or a specific place within the city. It's something that former City Council of Innsbruck, Mr. Fritz, already talked about. This is quite important for us because it's like a sort of a local master plan which is a fundamental instrument for the area management or for the urban development, for the city planning. It requires a cooperative planning process. So we're like in a direct dialogue with the investors that want to build or create something. It's important to also involve the people in this decision making, because at the end it has to be passed by the parliament, or in the end maybe even by the people. So this is very important. We also have quite a lot of freedom within this framework that we are establishing. We can write things in there, for instance, concerning public housing, next to normal things like volumes or how much usage you can have there. Which leads me to a very important paragraph in our planning code, which is the paragraph 58. It's about the aesthetics. It's what we call the aesthetics paragraph. If I try to translate this, it says something like, buildings, facilities, advertisements, labels, and coloring need to be designed in order to achieve a good outcome. So now what's a good outcome? If you would translate that to the Swiss school system, then you would have to achieve a mark of 5, 6 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. So you are required as an investor to achieve a mark of high in order to get a building permit. And who is in charge of taking care of this? Who is in charge of approving this? It's the Stadtbildkommission, or the advisory committee, which, of course, as we've heard today many times already, administers the quality in the built environment. It does examine all the architectural and urban projects regarding their aesthetics. Nevertheless, to speak, it's of great importance for us. It's a body of different members being appointed by the government. There are all external professional architects, landscape architects, economists, so it's really a broad body that advises us on these important matters. And also, most of the work is also, we've heard it today already, is to prevent the worst. So, the Stadtbildkommission, what is a very important particularity of the Stadtbildkommission in Basel is, maybe in comparing to the cases we've heard today, their decisions that they take are binding, legally binding. So if they say this project is not good enough, it doesn't achieve the mark of 5, it can't be built, it can't get building permission, even if the government would like to have it realized. Here you see the Stadtbildkommission at their work. Now we get to a next point, which is the Denkmalschutz, the Cultural Heritage Preservation Authority. Basel is a city with a large or important historic building part. Its medieval core is extensive, and obviously most of it is completely protected, but we also have important structures from the time of the last fin du siècle, turning century. The Denkmalschutzgesetz also shows that the decisions taken by the Cultural Heritage Preservation Authority are also binding in certain areas of town. So when you're looking at the zoning plan, and there are certain zones within the city that are protected, and they're actually quite big, quite large, then the buildings per se are protected, and whatever kind of change that you want to make to your house, you have to talk to the Cultural Heritage Preservation Authority, and they will tell you if it's going to work or not. Now, as I said, we're in a city, in an environment that is rapidly changing. Already in 1977, the state adopted a law to compensate added property value due to rezoning. So let me explain this quite quickly. If you have like a zone today which allows you to build a 3-story high building, and it's being rezoned in order to allow buildings for 6 stories, then at the point when you achieve the building permit, 50% of the added value of your property is being taxed. And 50% of this tax money is going into a fund. and this fund is only going to be used for upgrading or creating new public or green spaces. This means that the in-between or the public spaces are of big importance, and it's also a side effect, an interesting side effect is that it's being acknowledged both by the investors and both by the public, because the investors, they give the money into that fund, but they see that something interesting is being created because the public spaces, green spaces, are being either created or upgraded. So this also helps them in their economic thinking when it comes to their property value. And on the other side, of course, it's very much accepted by the public because the public can create very directly from this, which I think interesting law. Participation obviously is also very important, and participation is also regulated. It's in the constitution of the state. Paragraph 53 says that we have to consultate the people when it comes to big things, like, for instance, an adaptation of the general spatial plan. So that's a formalized process where consultation takes place. But what's more important for us is paragraph 55. It concerns the neighborhoods, and it requires that the city-state of Basel includes its inhabitants into the forming of opinion and decision-making process. So that opens a wide field of participation, and it's quite important for us, especially since the population in Basel is politically very active, and the forming of the political will is very important because in the end, usually we have to pass referendums or certain votes. You see here what can participation mean, that there's a wide range. For instance, that we invite people for workshops when it comes to new large areas that are being transformed, former industrial sites, for instance, that you see here on the right side, the former industrial site that is being reused with new housing, also public housing, a new school, squares, but also an area for new businesses. So people are being invited and they collaborate, but it's also guided tours. For instance, we've seen that before in many presentations. Here's an example from the European Day of Historic Preservation. Every year, that's a big festivity which attracts more than 3,500 people normally. Or to the far left, that's actually our biggest transformation site at the moment, Klebeck, plus the former industrial site. Now I'm getting to the soft laws, let's say. So next to our formal tools, we apply certain processes in order to achieve quality, of course, in the built environment. What are they? I would like to talk about cooperation, moderating, curating. Then I would also like to talk about defining guardrails, like Leitbilder in German. Then, of course, the whole field of architectural design competition, which is a very important part for us. And the last will be the role model, us, how are we being perceived by the public? How are we being perceived by the professionals also? So we've heard already a lot about this field today, but I think what's very important here is to be proactive. In our position, we can't wait for investors to come up to us and say, hey, I have this problem, or I want to do this, or wait till in a neighborhood people are going onto the street. I think it's more and more important that we realize that we cannot just send out decrees. Our goal must be more like the role of a moderator, of curating things, of having the different approaches of the different interests of people or investors bringing them together and forming something new, persuading, having a discursive policy making in the end, so that we understand, or that we can achieve a mutual understanding. And I think it is really crucial that we are proactive. And it also applies, of course, or it requires that we show leadership in a way, go up to the investors, be a serious counterpart to them in their wishes, in their desires, in their needs. We have a lot of landowners, finally, and what's so important in dealing with all those kind of different companies or investors is, I think, that we have to trigger their ambition. They have to be ambitious in order not to just achieve something and build whatever they like, but they have to, for themselves, get to the point that they find, I really want to make here something that is exceptional, that is extraordinary, that is new, that is addressing the crucial questions of our time. And on the other side, next to the investors, obviously, it's the politicians that we are dealing with on a daily basis. And here the question is similar in a way, because we have to also here raise awareness, or we have to almost educate them. Here you see 3 of the state councils, or the government, being informed directly, in this case by Vittorio Lampugnani, on a huge project which takes place in the harbor area. That's very important for us to have this direct contact with the politics, because it's very important that they understand from scratch what is going on and why we are doing what we are doing, because obviously in urbanism, all the questions, big questions, are being addressed. Equality, privileges, avoiding displacement. In a growing city, you have the huge question of public housing, of the phenomenon of gentrification, and so on. And just to understanding or being aware or addressing it actively, that city planning is always extremely political, so it's our job to educate the politics. And then there's the general public. As you may know, in Switzerland, just about everything is being voted on. So it's extremely important that we start from the very beginning to get in contact with the people, because obviously people are very active, and in the end, if they vote against big city planning like the one you see to the right with the 9 and the also voted on, that's the one I showed you before, that was in November being voted on, and we succeeded, luckily. But that's very important, because in the end, if you reach a 9 at the public, your work, the whole work, is senseless. In order to facilitate planning, we have several comprehensive plans, or light builder. They, of course, cannot be enforced. That's not their task, but they usually show where development is supposed to take place, what kind of development we aim to achieve. They are here to guide investors, and I would just like to show 2 examples. One is the Hochhaus concept, which shows the areas which are suitable for high-rises. That's our idea, the public administration's idea, where high-rises would make sense in the urban fabric. So we try to guide the spatial development here of the city, envisioning principles which have to be followed in order to plan and build a high-rise in this case. Another one, that's something that we talked about before, especially Mr. Benender and others, as urbanism is becoming more and more important in these times, where whole city quarters are being redefined, where former industrial sites are up for urban renewal. We implemented Begleitgruppe Städtebau. It's also an advisory board, but it's not formalized. It's something that I just did because I felt the need for it. It's very important, this support group, for us because it guards the big picture. You know, if you're every day in your work life, you tend to lose at some point the whole picture, the big perspective. And what you see here, for instance, is the area in Basel Nord, which shows what are the main characters of this. And obviously, again, it's the in-between. It's the public spaces, it's green spaces that are finally being connected with each other. It's the big natural landscape of the River Rhine and the River Wiese. So this is something that I very much believe in, especially in times which have become more and more short notice and unpredictable in this disruptive context that we are living in and practicing our profession. Then the architectural design competition is a very important part of our daily work because it's a cultural heritage, you could always say, in Switzerland, because the first rules were already established in 1877. For us, obviously, it's the most important tool to secure quality in the built environment. All the important buildings, public buildings for sure, but also other buildings by companies, originate usually in architectural design competitions. And in Switzerland, the SCA, which is the chamber of the Swiss engineering and architects, they established rules many years ago, and we try to follow those rules more or less, because you know every time a competition asks different questions, there are different players that are involved, and I also strongly believe that, of course, the practice of competition has to evolve, especially if we understand it as a source for innovation. And I think that's very important. It's not just to get the best project, it's also to work on the innovation of our practice. And needless to say, it's a very, very strong tool to promote young professionals, to give them a chance to show what they can do. So this is a picture of a recent urban design competition that we held. You see here how people talk. You know, it's usually those competition boards are quite large because there are professionals, obviously. There are the investors, but there are also and always people present from the general public. We get to the last point, and I think that's an also very important point. If we understand our work as being some sort of a role model, then we have different tools that we can achieve this role. First of all, it sounds very banal, but I think it's crucial, is documenting our work. For instance, if we make an architectural design competition, we document those works, we document all the works. We remunerate, of course, also the participants. There's a reasonable prize money, but important is it's also being documented, so it can be handed over to the investor or to the general public, to the politicians, to understand what has been the discussion in achieving this work. And you see here also documentation of all the public buildings once they're finished with some general information as well as building costs, etc. With all of our public building projects, of course, we try to see them as like beacon projects. Basel is known for its high architectural profile. And in that sense, it's almost, an affair of honor that the city takes good care of those public projects. I show here a school. I think schools especially are very important because, school is like the first architecture child is being exposed to outside from his home. That's where, it's crucial for the perception of space and understanding what good space means. We also hold architecture prizes. And I think it's very important, architecture prizes and awards, because it's a tool to actually promote innovative and high-quality architecture. It's important for the architects in a way, but it's also very important for the investors, for the Bauherren, you know, that they understand, oh, I did something great, as Mr. Mattis said in Zwischenwilen. And for this year or last year, it was in October, for the first time we made an exhibit, not just a little booklet, but we made an exhibit in a public space in the Mir center of town. And again, that's, you know, one of the ways to reach out to a more broader general public in order for them to understand what good quality architecture means. And then, you know, the active citizens' information is very important. We try to be present in the media, in the press. We work together with Architekturdialoge. That's a platform for the discussion of architectural topics, like in a very wide range in Basel, or with SAM, the Swiss Architecture Museum, which is based in Basel, which brings me to the last. We also try to be present in exhibitions. The current exhibition, which lasts until May, so if you have time and be in Basel, go see it. It's on density, and 2 rooms of the museum are being displayed, or our big scale projects are being displayed at the moment. So all of these means, obviously, or tools are here to create awareness for the importance of quality and architecture in urban design. And in that sense, I hope I was able to show you some of our means, how we try to work on this very important topic of Baukultur. Thank you.